Hi, Ozlem. Welcome. Welcome on the podcast.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to have you here. Ozlem Sarioglu. We know each other since 15 years. You did the voice dialogue course, and then we got to know each other much better by working together in Turkey and in Italy and in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested in the concept that you developed, and that you've written a book about called World Voices.
Yep.
But let's talk about that. But first, maybe you want to introduce yourself a bit more.
Sure. Thank you for having me here. So this is Ozlem. I am a professional coach, originally Turkish, now living in the Netherlands. Maybe that will be one of the things we'll discuss. So I studied international relations. To be a diplomat, but I never became a diplomat at the end. I worked in corporate finance, working mostly for mergers, acquisitions, those kind of topics. And then I switched my career into coaching. And that's basically when we met. I had the voice dialogue training when I first made the switch because it helped me a lot when I was making the transition. I right now am working as a coach on leadership topics, on talents, team coaching, systemic work. I also own a digital coaching platform called Sparkus. And over there, I also have the role of being a entrepreneur, and also a leader to a company. So I'm using the principles of voice dialogue almost daily, not only just delivering sessions. And coming from a corporate background, working with teams, having a international relations background, they all triggered me into thinking while I was learning voice dialogue, how can these principles be applied to larger systems? At the moment, it's more focusing on individual level or couples work, but I was always wondering, what if there were more people involved? So I think that curiosity brought me into the idea of world voices, which we will mostly discuss
World
today.
Voices.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, can you tell me a bit more about it? That's interesting. You have this study as a diplomat.
Yeah.
Working with world issues, I guess, diplomats, and so some of the principles from there and how they apply to the voice dialogue principles.
Yeah.
Would you tell me more?
Yeah, one of the things that we learned while learning political science, basically, there's this definition called politics is a power game. So always you look through the lenses of who's powerful now, who has more power over the other. And the idea is always defining that power structure. And I see that in the politics, in national politics, in societal issues, or in world politics, most of the time the focus is very much on the power side of things. What voice dialogue brings into the picture when we're looking into couples work, for instance, is not only the power side of two sides having a polarity, but we also have the notion of the vulnerability. So what is the power side of someone somehow attached to the vulnerability of the other one, and what vulnerability is triggering what power in the other, and vice versa. So when I'm looking at politics from the angle of vulnerability, that is generally not spoken about. And since we're missing that piece, most of the time, polarities are not easy to solve. And adding that dimension into the into politics or any kind of society issues, or to teams or organizations, is a new level that we need to be focusing on, because mostly, as we know from the voice dialogue principles, vulnerability, disowned selves, these are where the solution to the polarization is. So that was the starting point for me. And
Yeah, so in voice dialogue, in the individual work, we know that the primary selves, the selves that are strong, they always have a role of protecting the vulnerability.
Exactly.
And we've also seen in the voice dialogue work, in couples work, that it's essential at some point that people express their vulnerability next to their power.
Exactly.
To really find lasting solutions.
And we also know in voice dialogue in couples work that if someone doesn't develop a self to take care of that vulnerability personally, then that role is carried by the other person. It's always transferred to the other person. So the more vulnerable you are, the more power you give to the other person. So that level of things also tell us how we unknowingly trigger more polarity, let's say, in the society. I think what is very important to underline, something that was maybe very subtly, not explicitly mentioned, let's say, in the voice dialogue theory is, let's say if we're talking about a couple, there is also a level of shared vulnerability or shared vulnerability of the system, let's call it. Like if you're talking about a family situation, somebody needs to take care of the, let's say, the money. Somebody needs to take care of the household. And those roles are divided between the couples most of the time. And if one party is not taking care of that shared vulnerability, doing their role, then the polarization starts between between the couple in the relationship. And a similar thing is very relevant. Let's say if we're talking about a team situation, because you gather people to handle different parts of the work, and because the system, let's say the business, needs someone, for instance, to make the sales, the other one to, assure the services, etc. So if one party is not doing their part, taking that responsibility, the others start to feel vulnerable altogether. So it also triggers the conflict and polarity between them. Same applies to societies, same applies to world situations. So there is that common vulnerability of a system, not just talking about one person or the other one. So somebody needs to take care of that vulnerability. And if that is not done in a balanced way, that's when we're talking about polarities in the society.
Can you give some example of how you would work with that in a team, for instance?
Yeah. One of the things, let's say in a team situation, I'm entering there as let's say a team coach, and we somehow know as a team coaches that there are somehow two let's say camps in the team. Like one party, let's say it's a department, let's say the finance department, is not so happy with the sales team, and they are somehow either openly in conflict, or you just feel the energy that there is a very tense energy between them. So one of the things we would do is to understand, looking at these teams as primary selves, basically primary selves of the system.
Finance people and the
like people. Not consider each one individual as an individual, but any voice that is brought by the members of the team are almost like inner selves of an individual. So looking from that angle, focusing on like, what do finance people need? So what is the vulnerability below that? What are the strengths of the finance team? What do they bring to the table? And how are they taking care of the system as a whole from their angle? So let's say they are making budget cuts because they want to make sure that the company survives in let's say an economic instability period, as right now it's happening in many companies. And then there is the other part, which is, let's say, the marketing and sales team. They want to make expenditure so that they can bring in more sales. They want to go to events. They want to, I don't know, make campaigns, etc. And if you're looking from their angle and asking their vulnerability, what they're taking care of for the system is to bring in new business. And the main idea is not about spending money, but it's basically bringing in money to the system. So if you start asking from the angle of like, what do you bring to this table, and what are you afraid of? Just openly asking, like, what would happen if you were not there? What would happen if you were not able to do your function? And how will it affect the system? Not personally you, but how would it affect the system? Having those conversations actually brings people to a place of understanding each other, understanding each other's perspective, and also start taking care of it from their angle, not just asking maybe the salespeople won't be just asking for the finance to give them budget cuts, but they can also learn to be more creative when they're spending their budget. And the others can also have a more creative approach from the angle of how can we make sure that there is enough business coming into the organization. So like everybody starts taking somehow the disowned selves that are left to the other department, let's say, to learn from each other, to start thinking together and co-create something together. Which
because they hear each other's vulnerability.
Exactly. And then not only just each other's vulnerability, but also understanding what the other's vulnerability means for them also as a part of the system.
Okay.
So as a part of, and like the whole idea is almost bringing a aware ego to the system.
Aware ego, that's a big concept in voice dialogue.
Exactly.
So what would be an aware ego in such a team? How would you say that?
I think rather than just blaming each other, saying like, okay, you're because you're restricting me, or because you're making all this expenditure, just sitting down and understanding, okay, this is the situation. So we need to take care, we need to make sure that we're not spending too much, but at the same time we're spending somehow enough that it will create additional work. Like, how can we do this together, really? Just sit down and think about co-create together, collaborate together. That's basically where we're trying to get at. And similar things applies to the society as well.
Okay. So in a team situation, you facilitate it, you interview these people and you have them share that with each other? Yeah,
most of the time it's like you bring people together in a large group, a room. Of course, there is a design to making that conversation happen, making an alliance with all the participants. But at one point, talk about, for instance, the future of the company. What do they see all together as a common vision? And then what needs to happen right now? And what are the fears right now in today's situation when comparing it to the future of the organization? And making them all speak together in a room about their hopes, about their fears, about their restrictions. Sometimes it's not a personal thing, but it's like there is a regulation they need to follow. Yeah, something like that. But just very openly speaking about them. And sometimes we see, when we're talking about it like this, it sounds very logical. Yeah, of course, everybody can do that. But there are moments where people are so much taking it very personal. Again, then coming to impersonal situation, maybe we can talk about that also. But they're taking it too personal. Like, this person from that team is, making this to me level. So when we start talking in a team coaching situation, it is no longer about the one individual versus the other. It's not about one department versus the other, but it's really like, oh, these are different voices in the system. Okay. And how can we co-create, you taking care of the vulnerabilities that they're all carrying and making a kind of a better outcome for the organization.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have experience that works, and
the
team comes to a new level.
Yeah.
Transforms.
There are also cases where the team we are coaching is not fighting against each other, but there is almost a I would say an evil character outside. There is someone to blame outside. It can be I don't know, the new CEO. It can be something about,
So
indeed polarize with another system.
CEO
or another, like a competitor or something like that. But when then you start looking into it again from the voice dialogue perspective, so what is my vulnerability that I'm giving them so much power?
Okay, and what might be a disowned self?
What might be a disowned self?
What is the other person or the other group carrying?
Exactly.
But we as a group, as a team have disowned.
Yeah, exactly. And how can we learn from that? Rather than just making it the judging it only. Yeah. So, I mean, it really depends on where the vulnerability, where the polarity is, towards whom, and then trying to understand what's the disowned self.
And do you explain, it's like a practical psychology course. Do you explain it to them?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I do.
So for people like in a corporate setting, it helps to understand the psychology of selves.
Definitely.
Primary selves, vulnerability, disowned selves, aware ego.
Yeah. Definitely. Sometimes I tend to do more, theory behind it, like just talk about it more in detail. Sometimes just by a very short exercise, I make them stand up, stand on 2 feet first, and then say, like, just start leaning on 1 foot only, and just see how the other one actually, the first one is getting very
oneself.
With the primary self, and the other one is like, which part of you, which leg, which resource are you not using? So those kind of conversations, like physically feeling it, sometimes helps them to understand.
Interventions.
Exactly.
Group sharing, explanations, some body work. And sometimes it's just in the design of the team coaching. I just have that, notion in my head about, looking to the team from the perspective of the voice dialogue and just designing the exercises that they're going to do just with that mindset, but not explicitly talking about disowned selves, etc. But then you don't need to use the language necessarily.
Sometimes just the question of like, what do you admire on the, let's say, on the competitor, and what do you want to integrate into your system is a good starting point.
Okay, nice, interesting. Yeah. So you were also saying you can also apply it on a larger scale, or
sure.
Tell me, this is interesting in the world situation at the moment.
Yeah. So of course there are a lot of political conflicts going around, and depending on from which angle you're looking at, you can make not judgments even, just make justifications, let's say, to both parties. There is the Israeli-Palestine issue going on. There is Ukraine-Russia. A lot of other things happening in Syria. So there are in a lot of places, polarities happening everywhere, even in daily society. I'm coming from Turkey, and it's a highly polarized country right now. Or when you look at the elections in the US, the Brexit issue, there is almost like cut in half voting, like almost 50-50, like half of the society wants something, the other half wants something else. It's kind of happening everywhere. Of course, fed a lot with social media. We know that. But again, it comes down to what is the underlying vulnerability there?
There's almost no space for that in the public debate. There's always judging and criticizing.
Yeah, and just saying like, oh, this is the powerful and bad one, and this is the good one. So there is like all those not trying to understand what's the really the fears or the hopes below whatever is happening. And coming back to social media, there are a lot of discussions that that social media basically feeds. Of course, you see more the things you like, so it actually feeds that feeling of, oh, I'm just. I mean, if it's
People are in their own bubble.
They all end up in their own bubble, and if you're not manipulated, there is also a lot of manipulation, of course, going on. Like you can just watch something, a different version of the same story. But when it comes down to it, what social media is very powerful in playing is fear. So what we see is a lot of intervention, let's say, by triggering the feeling of fear in people that, oh, this might happen in my country as well, or this might happen to me as well. It might have happened to my child as well. So when you look at it from that angle, you just see how it is so much linked to vulnerability, basically. But not in a sense of taking care of vulnerability, but making people feel vulnerable. So that's the core issue going on.
I mean, these are huge topics that you mention, and is there any example of a situation where there has been some intervention that worked out in a positive way with World Voices?
Not necessarily in World Voices. I mean, unfortunately, not yet. I didn't use it. So
let's say if you could have a magic wand and you would not be a team coach, but you would be, like, say, a country coach and facilitate some situation. Let's not take the most difficult one. But what kind of situation would you choose to?
My biggest dream was to run a session in the UN. United Nations, about a certain topic. I don't know what. It could be, let's say, refugees. And bring all those people together and let them first start sharing their perspective.
Which people?
With different countries that are, somehow affected. Some other countries that are just watching, maybe. And just to hear their perspective of the situation, and start having the conversation of not just like, oh, but you did this to us, and the others did the other thing. So it's just not like the blame part, but really like, how do you feel when you're watching this going on? What's your fear in running this? And just start having first an open conversation. Then make it very explicit. Ask people to take sides. We are with, let's say, the refugees. We want to support them versus we are the refugees versus, well, we actually don't care. So there can be many different voices in the group, and try to, just somehow make the polarization very visual.
I remember an exercise that you did with us in one of the courses, I think in Italy, where we worked with the theme the newcomers and the people who live there. The people who were born
locals.
there. And then the immigrants. And I remember we had these two groups facing each other in the space. And that was interesting that each group, there was a position for power side, let's say the judgment, and a position for the vulnerable side. So the immigrants, they had their power side. Well, we've gone through hell, and we went through the sea, and we crossed everything, and now we're here, and we're powerful. And their fear, their vulnerable side, for the fear for being rejected or sent back. And then the people who lived there, their power side was the locals. They said, well, we are here since many centuries, and we have our national anthem, and we have our customs, and we have the St. Nicholas celebration, and we want to keep it that way, and we don't like these newcomers. They are after our women, and so and so. So very judgmental. But their own fear for being
Yeah, losing their identities, losing what they already, like some of them losing their jobs. So we discussed all those. And, similar situation in many, I think, refugee situation is exactly happening.
Yeah.
And there is a more, kind of a humanitarian approach, of course, like let's help them, versus there are also people on the the newcomer side that like I don't need any support. I just give me a work and just I'll make it on my own. I'm not asking for that kind of support. So there is a lot of layers of that. But I think in that exercise we did, one of the biggest transformation moment, which I believe, I mean, in my fantasy running a session in the UN, I also have that moment of thinking, what do you admire on the other side? Because most of the time we're talking about judgments, and that admiration already tells us a lot about how the vulnerability of one part, let's say the locals, are actually feeding the polarity with the other one, and vice versa. And one of the things that the locals said, I remember when we were running that exercise, was, I admire them because they know how to build a new life. And I don't. If I lose my job here, I don't know how I'm going to survive. I've never built a new life. I've always been here. Versus the other part, when we asked them about what they admired in the people that were locals, are like, oh, they just have their system. They didn't have to run away from a country. And they know the language, they understand, how the system works. So these are the areas that needs to be discussed, basically, because those are areas where it creates all the tension. And then what we did in that exercise, and in my fantasy also doing that, like just first after speaking that, also coming to an aware ego position. After all like that conversation middle. In the middle.
And in that exercise, what was interesting is that you could do all the positions you could start with being a newcomer and do the two positions there, power and vulnerability, and then you could switch to being the local,
exactly,
and then also do the power and vulnerability there, and then so you had a taste of everything.
I think the power of embodiment, we all know, that's like also in constellation and that kind of work, is like just by changing positions, you basically feel the other person's feelings. And most of the time that is lacking in the bigger system. Just literally putting yourself in other person's shoes, and that part is very much needed. And what was also possible when we moved to the aware ego position after making all those moves around different positions in the room, was having the question, whose voice we didn't heard yet. So there were also some people that we just kind of assumed were not there, were not an issue. For instance, right now I'm coming from Turkey, living in the Netherlands, and I would call myself an expat rather than a migrant. I didn't flee the country, I didn't have that experience, but I just have the experience of living in another country. And for instance, in that exercise, while we were running this exercise, people like mine didn't have a voice in the room. It was all about, the migrants and refugees.
So it could be more differentiated.
Exactly. And then you can start understanding, some of the rules that you're setting for something actually doesn't apply to, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but then you can start understanding what are the subtleties, what is missing, what's not being heard in the system, what are the other areas of potential, mines.
As you said in the beginning, diplomacy and politics, it's a power game. Huh?
Yeah.
So if you think of the United Nations and you have any fantasy how you would create a situation where that can happen in such a way?
So that is the nice question, because I think what is tricky in the politics is there are some people who are benefiting from the conflict. So
They have an interest.
Yeah, they have an interest in the conflict going on.
You mean like in financial ways, or
in financial ways, selling weapons, financially investing in, let's say, let's fantasize that you're a big construction company and a country is just going away completely, and then you just go there and build new houses. You make money out of it, not necessarily just weapons, so there can be many things. Or you're the head of let's say a terrorist organization. Of course, you wouldn't like to lose your powerful place where people are just treating you as the top of something. You wouldn't have the feeling of, let's agree with people. So anybody, or like you're a kind of a dictator in a country, and there's an inner, a civil war going on in your country. You wouldn't say, oh, there are some unhappy people, let's
That's
so
the
that's
power
the
side. So
exactly
everybody's attached to their position.
Exactly, everybody's attached to their position, but not everybody, in that sense, are completely against the polarization to end. So the more you do such work, the better you would differentiate who are just sticking to the power position and make every effort not to not lose their powerful situation, and then then it will be easier to negotiate, at least with those who are willing to change some things. But also, it's important to understand that having an interest is also vulnerability. Having an interest in something means I have a vulnerable self. Like, why do I want to keep my position? Why do I stick to a power self? Which means I'm acting from a primary self. Probably there is the bigger the power, the bigger the vulnerability. So what am I so afraid of? What am I so afraid of losing? So then there can be additional conversations about how to solve those issues. If you start differentiating the ones who are just afraid and trying to be powerful versus those who are willing to do anything just to remain in their powerful position. So there is, years ago did a training, and somebody was saying that we need to differentiate. The conversation was about neo-Nazis in, I think, in Greece or somewhere. I cannot remember the country.
In Greece.
Yeah. And the person was saying we need to differentiate the neo-Nazis from the voters of the neo-Nazis. So voters have a maybe some kind of a fear, some vulnerability that is fed by that approach. So the more you understand the vulnerability, some people, and you start taking care of the vulnerability, it's easier to differentiate who are really, playing with this versus who are really afraid and they just look for somewhere, a powerful figure to support. So I think that is the core concept. Not everybody will be very much willing to collaborate with everyone and come to peace with everyone. But the more you understand vulnerability, the more you can take away the inflated support around them.
So it seems the world peace is still a bit far on the horizon.
Always, I think, yeah.
But understanding dynamics, the personal dynamics in voice dialogue, but also the dynamics in groups, which what you do is it like an extension of the view of the personal dynamic to dynamics in an organization and also in a society.
Exactly.
So at least I would say the people who have some influence in politicians or change agents or whatever way, they might benefit from this, this approach looking at the situation. For
instance, one of the coming back to that exercise we did with the group talking about, migration and newcomers and locals. One of the takeaways I personally had in that conversation was that vulnerability of the locals saying, I don't know how it feels like to go into another country and build a life there. So you don't need to create a new war situation for people to relocate. But what you can do is create programs like Erasmus, for instance, where university students can go to another country and just experience living in another country just for a few periods, like a year or something, just studying there and just having that experience and then coming back to, owning our disowned selves. If a disowned self is for the locals to experience another country, experience another world, creating those kind of programs actually helps not only for people to learn different experiences, but also them being more open and maybe less judgmental towards new people coming in because they had the same experience themselves. So if you look things from that angle, maybe we cannot just solve things immediately. It's a long process probably. Maybe it will never happen. But at least you can start building in the policies, approaches that will affect people in the longer run. If you really understand what's their main vulnerability below it. So defining social, social policies, or for an organization, if you're talking about building in organizational cultures, if you understand those kind of vulnerabilities, then it's kind of easier, maybe not immediately, but to build those policies and start building that culture slowly over time.
Yeah, I guess people have to realize that they have a shared vulnerability as human beings.
Yeah.
Like I can imagine in a team, the shared vulnerability will be about the continuation of the team and
continuation of the company.
Or the company, the organization. For a country, it's more abstract for most people, or for Europe, or for the world. Or the climate discussion.
I think climate and COVID, those two things, I think shows us our common humanity, especially COVID, for instance. Like it happened and the whole world stopped. It was, not related to which country you're living in. It was not related to, what your race was, what your political opinion was. That was just like that. We just, stayed all in the house. So that was a very good moment of reminding us that, hey, we have a very shared, vulnerability. Yeah. We can be extinct as basically human beings. And similar challenge now is there with climate change. And still, we managed to polarize about vaccination, about whether the climate change is real or not, or the policies that are built around it, etc. But at the end of it, there is the common fear of all of us dying at the bottom line.
Yeah. So in a way, humanity should learn to be in touch with vulnerability.
Yeah.
And then be able to share that with one another.
Yeah. And also I think the more we stay in just the judgment of, this person is not being, rational because they are against vaccination, or this person is not rational, actually they are pro-vaccination, let's say. All those judgments that we attach to it actually sticks us more into our primary selves. And when we look at the vulnerability,
in the primary selves, in the individual, as I'm a psychologist, when you're identified with the primary self, the nice thing is you feel so secure because you know how the world is.
Yeah.
And to be disidentified from the primary self in your aware ego, there's more space, but it's also more uncertain.
Exactly.
So people have to be able to deal with uncertainty and not knowing.
Not knowing, yeah. And I think that's where I mean, there are very different sides of the same topic maybe, but to understand the other person's vulnerability means that you need to be more curious rather than judgmental, saying like, that is a very, for me, a very weird approach, but, you know, what's your rationale?
Tell me more about
yeah, exactly. And then try to really understand, not just the rational thoughts, not the power side of the other person, but what's the fear for the other person? Like, what are you really afraid of when you're talking about this?
What do you mean exactly?
What do you mean? Yeah.
What's your worry?
What's your need?
Yeah.
If you start listening more those things, not just like, okay, there is an article about this and that, kind of like the rational thoughts behind it, but really trying to understand, like, let's say I'm talking about from the vaccination story, for instance, but really trying to understand, you know, what are you afraid of when you are thinking about being vaccinated? What are you afraid of if you're not vaccinated? Like, what's your need? And then when you start having that conversation, we always come to the place of like, we are human beings. We have very similar needs. We have very similar fears. And then, so we're trying to solve the same issue, but from a different angle. Yeah.
So people have to be able to meet in such a respectful and honest way with one another.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we both know the voice dialogue. Well, what do you feel, how can voice dialogue play a role in achieving world peace, the big one? I
think more people working with politics and conflict resolution, the more people working in this field understand voice dialogue and its implications, it would be easier to come to a solution. Because right now, when we're looking at things from the typical politics is a power game perspective, we are just listening to primary selves talking to other primary selves. The more we understand that there are primary cells and disowned cells, not only in terms of like, you're carrying my primary, I'm carrying your, you're carrying my disowned self, I'm carrying your disowned self perspective, but from the perspective of, I personally have also a side, a part of me that actually admires the other part and just thinks like, oh, they're doing something good there. Or also at the same time, like, I'm afraid of something, but they're good with handling this. The more it will be easier to come to a solution, I think. So yes, my fantasy is that more people dealing with politics, not to create only political statements towards another, but really to create some policies, understanding polarities and the vulnerabilities of different people in the society. I think that would create a more sustainable change to issues that look like they're impossible to solve. So yes, my fantasy is really having more people having that experience and that mindset shift from the primary self perspective to where we go, trying to see, what are the selves that are active here. And we both know that where we go is not a static position, so it can change over time. But at least for the time being, let's say, trying to understand for this issue, for this topic, whatever the topic a person is dealing with for conflict, like what can be at least a solution for the time being, hearing all the voices, hearing all the vulnerabilities below these voices, that would create at least a minimal change, which might have a bigger impact.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very nice wish and conclusion, I think. Thank you very much, Ozlem, for being here on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
it was a nice experience to talk about, go that deep with voice dialogue. Thank
Okay,
you.
good luck with the continuation.
Thank you.